All right, y'all. So, funny enough, this is what the channel was supposed to be. Not with the video quality being this bad, although, to be honest with you, I don't care. I'll invest in better picture quality when I get the money. But if you're new here, just realize one thing, take one thing with you is you'll never hear me asking you for money for simply doing this. In other words, don't feed the podcasters, don't feed the streamers, don't feed the video essayists. If they claim to be on the left, they shouldn't be charging you for merely their opinions, their analysis. So, like I said, initially, this channel was in my idea, in my head, my idea was, well, I love reading books, but I'm a slow reader. I may be, slightly dyslexic. I get distracted easily, but I love to read. And I know that there's people out there who may be struggling with the same thing, if not worse. And if they're not struggling, well, maybe they can put up with me. They can help me sound out some of the words. How about that? So, with that being said, the initial concept was a book club or just book review or chapter by chapter of a book that I've read or going through in order to hold myself accountable, to stay consistent. Well, that didn't happen because all these self-proclaimed leftists, all these opportunists profiting off the suffering of others, well, they were starting to normalize liberal Zionism, from Hassan Piker doing leftovers until his community cannot stand with him going into partnership with a Zionist family, with the Vanguard not pushing back on Marianne Williamson's Zionist propaganda in order to maintain access to her, but going so far as to doubling down, claiming that the kibbutz were these socialist, safe havens, that not all the original Zionists, were evil or had bad intentions, that there were some good ones among the colonizers. To Sam Cedar from the Majority Report, who has admitted to going to a kibbutz and yet refuses to call himself anti-Zionist because, according to him, anti-Zionism is a Zionist conspiracy to discredit you. And of course, his Wonder Bread co-host, Emma Vigeland, who claimed that when people ask, quote, when people ask, does Israel have the right to exist? Her answer was, of course it does, because it does exist. Tavia McLeck, who can only parrot academic settler accounts from Ilan Pape to Jeff Halper, right? So my anger, my rage, my resentment towards these individuals, and this was prior to October 7th, overcame me. And I'm like, scrap the book club idea. Let's go straight into talking that shit and calling these motherfuckers out. So that's what I did. And my intent was never to profit off of it, to make a penny off of any of this. I'm still figuring out what I'm trying to do. As you can tell, the video quality isn't the best. I need to figure out the lighting. We'll see. I recently added a couple additions to the setup, the behind the scenes stuff. And to be honest, it is expensive. And guess what? I'm not going to ask you for a penny. I'm going to pick up some OT. I'm going to work on my days off. Things that someone from the working class has to do, but none of these rich kids ever had to do. All right. So, with that being said, what's going on today? Well, there's a lot of books, especially like let's read a communist book and let's really dive into it. Let, let's let's really examine what socialist theory is. I mean, there's plenty of channels that do that, and respectfully, I'm not the best individual to have that type of book club or what have you, book review, whatever you want to call this. For that, we have Decolonized Buffalo. You know, we have Plants Phenon. We have other platforms to take advantage of theory and really breaking down the nerdy stuff. There's levels to this nerdy stuff, and I'm not that nerdy, believe it or not. I am, but not like that. All right, somebody really quickly, because I do want to address this. I know you say that streaming isn't work, but your discourses are clearly well structured and thought out in a way that suggests way more thought is put into these streams than the regular BS politics streamer. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Uh, thank you. But all I can say is that I'm good at BSing. I mean, that's how I feel. And, sure, maybe the amount of thought that I put into this is more than others. One of the things that I pisses me off, and man, I'm an angry fucking person. I'm an angry person. And it pisses me off that you'll see these political commentators be like, oh, this is the first time I'm watching this video. You're going to get my live reaction to it. As if your initial reaction to not a movie trailer, not a TV show, but your first initial political analysis or your political reaction is something that we should be paying attention to, something worth, in their mind, paying for. Always piss me off because I'm like, what are you doing? Like, is this a joke to you where you could just throw it on screen and let's see what happens? Like, you're not even going to think about it before. You're not going to, dig through your initial biases, your initial, reactionary response. Well, maybe they're better than me in terms of like, battling with their inner self and their most base, reactions. Because mine are never the most eloquent, the most articulate. Mine are usually the most angry, the most frustrated, the most disappointed, the most jaded. And yet these individuals not only think that their first reaction is sufficient enough, for their viewers, but it's worth paying for. And it's not just, the new streamers. I mean, Sam Cedar has a producer for this reason. He has stated multiple times on air, like, oh, keep playing that. I haven't seen it. Or pull up that video. I don't know which one it is. And it's like, you've been doing this for 2 decades. You're making thousands of dollars off of this. You have sponsorships. And still you cannot be bothered. You worked 4 days out of the week for only a couple hours, and still you can't be bothered to actually watch and review everything prior to going live. There should be exceptions to that without a doubt. But to say, oh, every single time, the majority of what I'll be viewing, if not all of it, is going to be the first time I see it, and you're going to get only my initial response, my initial reaction. How disrespectful is that? That they think their minds, their political knowledge is so vast and so great that you should be thankful and paying them for their initial reaction. That's disgusting. Listen, I'm sarcastic, so I'm reading that in a very sarcastic tone, and that's how I'm taking it, because compliments are for the weak. No. I appreciate that. But I was raised on tough love, so that's not how we're gonna do things around here. But thank you for that. Listen, and look, I don't know about millions. We have to get into this. I need to wake up. I wake up early. Sam used to get paid like million a year by MSNBC just to be available for an hour here and there. Can't expect him to take such a bad pay cut. Yeah, I don't know about millions. I don't know, but he's. And the thing is, and what I hate about individuals like him is they're social climbers. It's nothing based off their skills, and we've seen him do it in Hollywood with John Benjamin to the point where he pretends it's a joke. And we saw him do it in politics with Chris Hayes. Even the Majority Report wasn't initially his. Before the Majority Report, he was paired up with Mark Maron. Where's Mark Maron and where's Sam Cedar? Little things like that piss me off where it's like, dude, you're the bottom of the barrel. You're not good enough to make it on your own. And you're riding everybody's coattails. But hey, let's get into it. All right. So, what book are we starting off with? The thumbnail kind of reveals it. But why American Fascists? And really quickly, and I want to apologize to anybody who might want to read along. So the version of the book that I've had for a while, didn't align with any of the online PDFs that I totally think I'm 100% paid for. They were all missing about like 3 pages for the first chapter, and then from then on, it was very messy. So what I had to do was download like the Apple ebook version and then translate that into, or transfer that, whatever, into a PDF, because I feel like it's just easier to not get lost. So the book is American Fascists: The Christian Right and the War in America. Now, even the title for me, I have an issue with. Chris Hedges, for a lot of the hype that he gets, especially among the populist, movement, I have a lot of criticisms for him, but he's probably my favorite author. Because I disagree with him and because I have so much criticism of his, analysis and his worldview, especially when it comes to faith and his anti-communist sentiment, even then, I still will call him my favorite author because the way that he's able to convey his ideas and articulate his message, that's what I'm, thankful for, and I know what I'm going into when I read his work. I've read enough of his work, his older stuff, to where, when he makes an anti-Stalin remark, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's Chris Hedges. But the fact is that he's one of the best, was one of the best reporters, was on the ground, and wrote great, great books. I mean, you can't argue with that. I can argue with some of his comments, but I'm not going to argue with his, the fact that he produces great work, and that's why he is, my favorite author, despite us probably butting heads if we ever have a conversation. So that's the book. Even that, The Christian Right and the War in America. It's not a war in America, Chris. It's, the core, the heart of America trying to break free. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, let's actually start reading the book. And like I said, my apologies to anybody that has the PDF version of this. You're not going to be able to line this up, but this is the only way that I was able to essentially transfer my notes from my heart, from my paperback copy, almost, page per page. And he starts off with this comment: men never do evil so completely and cheerfully as when they do it from religious conviction. Blaise Pascal. And he does this breakdown of, the categories of, by Umberto Eco, essentially what makes a fascist. To be honest with you, I encourage all of y'all to, look it up, read it. I don't care for or agree with Umberto Eco's like list. So I'm not going to go over it here. Please feel free to go over it on your own. I'm going to go over the book. All right. I have some stuff highlighted. My initial idea is like, hey, like, let's go page per page, word for word. And obviously I have some things highlighted, no real annotations. I wanted to keep it a little bit more free flowing. However, if moving forward, it's like, hey, like, the whole chapter is kind of overkill, let me know in the comments, please. It'll save me some time. But at the same time, it's an opportunity for me to essentially reread a book, something I rarely have the opportunity to do. Again, because I'm a slow reader. and cannot afford the time. All right. Um, let's get started. All right. Cool. Chapter 1, Faith. Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them. In this formulation, I do not imply, for instance, that we should always suppress the utterance of intolerant philosophies, as long as we can counter them by rational argument and keep them in check by public opinion. Suppression will certainly be most unwise. But we should claim the right to suppress them if necessary, even by force, for it may easily turn out that they are not prepared to meet us on the level of rational argument. But begin by denouncing all argument. They may forbid their followers to listen to rational argument because it is deceptive, and teach them to answer arguments by use of their fists or pistols. We should therefore claim, in the name of tolerance, the right not to tolerate the intolerant. We should claim that any movement preaching intolerance places itself outside of the law, and we should consider incitement to intolerance and persecution as criminal, in the same way as we should consider incitement to murder or kidnapping or to the rival of the slave trade as criminal. Open Society and Its Enemies, Karl Popper. Okay, and immediately we start tackling this whole, idea of what I very annoyed to call like the whole free speech absolutist, right? The Not that I'm calling that, I'm sorry, but the individuals who advocate for free speech absolutism, to me, are usually um, the same way that people define like libertarians, right? Somebody born on third base who thinks they hit a home run. If you're advocating for absolute free speech, for me, it's like, oh, okay, I already know that you're probably some white dude, a cis het white dude, 99% of the time, because words have never resulted in you being persecuted and the death of anybody that looks like you, specifically targeted at somebody that looks like you. So that's why I oppose right from the bat, this absolute free speech BS. If you're advocating for that, we're probably not going to get along because you're probably a little privileged ass, if not rich, affluent, wealthy, comfortable white man. I grew up in a small farming town in upstate New York where my life and the life of my family centered on the Presbyterian church. I prayed and sang hymns every Sunday, went to Bible school, listened to my father preach the weekly sermon, and attended seminary at Harvard Divinity School to be a preacher myself. America was a place where things could be better if we worked to make them better, and where our faith saved us from despair, self righteousness, and the dangerous belief that we know and the dangerous belief that we knew the will of God or could carry it out. We were taught that those who claimed to speak for God, the self appointed prophets who promised the kingdom of God on earth, were dangerous. We had no ability to understand God's will. We did the best we could. We trusted and had faith in the mystery, the unknown before us. We made decisions, even decisions that on the outside look unobjectively moral, well aware of the numerous motives, some good and some bad, that went into every human act. In the end, we all stood in the need of forgiveness. We were all tainted by sin. none were pure. The Bible was not the literal word of God. It was not a self-help manual that could predict the future. It did not tell us how to vote or allow us to divide the world into us and them, the righteous and the damned, the infidels and the blessed. It was a book written by a series of ancient writers, certainly fallible, and at times at odds with each other, who asked the right questions and struggled with the mystery and transcendence of human existence. We took the Bible seriously and therefore could not take it literally. And this is where, like, Chris Hedges, where I appreciate his honesty, his transparent, very transparent with the contradictions of the Bible and how somebody of the Christian faith has to, at times, struggle with the word itself because, as he states, there's contradictions. So I appreciate that. But for me, I also hear it and find it as an excuse. As something for me, it's like, oh, well, how convenient that the word of God is not literal and that it's up to interpretation. That sounds very dangerous. Now, is it more dangerous as something, let's say the Quran, where it's no, this is the literal word of God? I mean, on my scoreboard, Christianity has more deaths. So, who's to say? But again, I appreciate it. There was no alcohol in the mass where I grew up. Indeed, my father railed against the glass bar, the one bar in town, and the drinking in the VFW hall. We did not work on Sunday. I never heard my father swear. But coupled with this piety was a belief that as Christians we were called to fight for justice. My father took an early stand in the town in support of the civil rights movement, a position that was highly unpopular in rural white enclaves, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the most hated men in America. A veteran of World War II, he opposed the Vietnam War, telling me when I was about 12 that if the war was still being waged, when I was 18 and I was drafted, he would go to prison with me. All right, this is where y'all find out I'm a crybaby. Just, take a step back and be like, damn, like, can you imagine the fervor at the time in support of the, Vietnam War? You do have like this younger generation saying, like, hell no, we won't go. But the older generation's like, you guys are cowards. You're traitors to the country. What are you, a bunch of commies? Right? And here we have, Chris Hedges was very fortunate, as described in the beginning of this chapter. But I think, and it's not unless you've experienced that type of struggle where there's nothing more fortunate than having, great parents or great role, great parental figures. There's nothing more fortunate in life than that. And that could be your biological, parents, that could be a teacher, that could be, grandparents, whatever, anybody raising you. To have somebody who loves you to the extent that they're willing to say, hey, like, I'm gonna get locked up with you at that young of an age. That's beautiful right there. That's awesome. And from what Chris had just talks about his father, like he was an outstanding, individual. So that's dope, man. And it makes me wish that like all Christians were like that. All right. To this day, I carry in my head the rather gloomy image of sitting in a jail cell with my dad. Finally, because his youngest brother was gay, he understood the pain and isolation of being a gay man in America. He worked later in life in a gay rights movement calling for the ordination of marriage of gays. When he found that my college, Colgate University, had no gay and lesbian organization, he brought gay speakers to the campus. The meetings led gays and lesbians to confide in him that they felt uncomfortable coming out of the closet to start an open organization. A problem my father swiftly solved by taking me out to lunch and informing me that although I was not gay, I had to form the organization. And the imagery of that's hilarious. Where it's like, nope, yep, it's you. Like to just, and mind you, he's in college already, so it's, he's in one sense or another an adult. His father's still like, nah, this is what you're doing. Again, sounds like a great man. When I went into the dining hall for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, the checker behind the desk would take my card, mark off the appropriate box, and hand it back to me, muttering. And the only reason I'm not going to say it, FAGGOT, is because I don't understand the censorship on YouTube. So we'll move on there. This willingness to take a moral stand, to accept risk and ridicule, was, he showed me, the cost of a moral life. Isn't that something? Let's read that one more time. This willingness to take a moral stand, to accept risk and ridicule, was, he showed me, the cost of a moral life. I mean, can you argue with that? Can you argue with that? Sometimes doing the right thing, you look like a fool, you'll get mocked at, what have you, man. I'll give an example, like, are vegans doing the right thing? Because everybody makes fun of those, of them people. I'm just something light, a light example there. I don't know. I'm comfortable with dying. Um, so I couldn't do it for more than like 2-3 years. Porque esa birria, it's too good. Okay. The four Gospels, we understood, were filled with factual contradictions. Two Gospels saying Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, while Luke asserted that John was already in prison. Mark and John gave little importance to the birth of Jesus, while Matthew and Luke give different accounts. There are three separate and different versions of the Ten Commandments. So that's dope. I did not know that. Exodus 20, Exodus 34, and Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy? How was it? No, okay, 5. As for the question of God's true nature, there are many substantive contradictions. Is God a loving or revengeful God? In some sections of the Bible, vicious acts of vengeance, including the genocidal extermination of opposing tribes and nations, appears to be blessed by God. God turns on Egyptians. God turns on the Egyptians and transforms the Nile into blood so the Egyptians will suffer from thirst, and then sends swarms of locusts and flies to torture them, along with hail, fire, and thunder from the heavens to destroy all plants and trees. To liberate the children of Israel, God orders the firstborn in every Egyptian household killed, so all will know, quote, the Lord, that the Lord makes a distinction between the Egyptians and Israel, end quote. The killing does not cease until there was not a house where one was not dead. Amid the carnage, God orders Moses to loot all the clothing, jewelry, gold, and silver from the Egyptian homes. God looks at the devastation and says, I have made sport of the Egyptians. While the Exodus story fueled the hopes and dreams of oppressed Jews and later African Americans in bondage of slavery, it also has been used to foster religious chauvinism. And from my limited understanding, there's actually no historical record, factual record of like Egyptians actually enslaving Jewish people. In my opinion, it's just kind of like they chose Egyptians because they were the largest um, group, empire, state, however you want to call it, there in that time. And it was almost like a battle of the old gods versus the new gods, right? The Abrahamic God beating out the Egyptian gods, which almost every religious story and figure is based off of. That's just my 2 cents, right? But again, I mean, even today we hear the fact like Amalek, right, referring to the Old Testament describing like the utter complete destruction of an enemy people to the Israelites. And they murdered, the men, women, children, and even the cattle. So we see the religious chauvinism in full effect even today. And that's one of the reasons why, and please y'all tell me if the AC is too loud. It's hot in here. That's one of the reasons why I was like, well, I really want to focus on this book, because not only are we seeing the effects of religious chauvinism weaponized, not the primary cause, never the primary cause, in Israel's genocide of Palestine, but it's weaponization. And how Chris Hedges breaks down the weaponization of Christianity will be used, has been used, and will be used in this country. All right. A literal reading of the Bible means reinstitution of slavery, coupled with the understanding that the slave master has the right to beat his slave without mercy, since the slave is his money. Exodus 21:21. Children who strike or curse a parent are to be executed. Exodus 21:15 and 17. Those who pay homage to another god shall be utterly destroyed. Exodus 22:20. Menstruating women are to be considered unclean, and all they touch while menstruating becomes unclean. Leviticus 15:19 through 32. The blind, the lame, those with mutilated faces, those who are hunchbacks or dwarves, and those with itching disease or scabs or crushed testicles cannot become priests. Leviticus 21:17 through 21. Blasphemers shall be executed. Leviticus 24:16. And if the spirit of jealousy comes upon a man, the high priest can order the jealous man's wife to drink the water of bitterness. If she dies, it is proof of her guilt. If she survives, of her innocence. Numbers 5:11 through 31. Women throughout the Bible are subservient to men, often without legal rights, and men are free to sell their daughters into sexual bondage. Exodus 21:7 through 11. Hatred of Jews and other non Christians pervades the Gospel of John. Jews, he wrote, are children of the devil, the father of lies. John 8:39 through 44. Jesus calls on his followers to love their enemies and to pray for their prosecutors, a radical concept in the days of the Roman Empire. He says we must never demean or insult our enemies. But then we read of Jesus calling his enemies the brood of vipers in Matthew 12:34. And again, while I may disagree with Chris Hedges' religious worldview, I appreciate him for this exact reason. Many Christians hide this these contradictions or look to excuse them. And you can make the argument that Chris Hedges is doing the same, merely providing you the examples, almost beating you to the punch. But I appreciate again how transparent he is with it all. He acknowledges the contradictions and then looks to go forward. You can call that an excuse. You can say that he is he may not be, blind in his faith, but he might be nearsighted. Continues. The book of Revelation, a crucial text for the radical Christian right, appears to show Christ returning to earth at the head of an avenging army. It is one of the few places in the Bible where Christ is associated with violence. This bizarre book, omitted from some of the early canons, regulated to the back of the Bible by Martin Luther, may have been a way, as scholars contend, for the early Christians to cope with Roman persecution and their dreams of final triumph and glory. The book, however, paints a picture of a bloody battle between the forces of good and evil, Christ and the Antichrist, God and Satan, and the torment and utter destruction of all who do not follow the faith. In this vision, only the faithful will be allowed to enter the gates of New Jerusalem. All others will disappear, cast into the lake of fire. The warriors defeat of the armies of the nations, the vast apocalyptic vision of war ends with birds of prey invited to gather for a great supper of God to eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses and their riders, the flesh of all men, both free and slave, both small and great. It is a story of God's ruthless, terrifying, and violent power unleashed on non believers. Before we read this quote on here, I just want to say, you know, it makes sense that what early Christians were experiencing under, Roman rule, like, I mean, they were getting destroyed for entertainment. Their bodies were torn to shreds, like in the Colosseum, from my understanding. So, with that being said, it makes sense that you want to add a little razzle dazzle to the ending of your story, right? Hope, hope, the promise of peace, everlasting peace is beautiful. But damn, nothing like seeing your enemies, your oppressors suffer the most cruel fate imaginable at the hands of your God, the God that they claim is not real, the God that is not, actively defending you or stopping your oppression, subjugation, and your torture. Well, to think at some point I'll rejoice in knowing that they will get theirs and I'll be granted everlasting peace. I mean, shit. It doesn't get better than that. The fourth angel poured his bowl on the sun, and it was allowed to scorch men with fire. Men were scorched by the fierce heat, and they cursed the name of God who had power over these plagues, and they did not repent and give him glory. The fifth angel poured his bowl on the throne of the beast, and, and its kingdom was in darkness. Men gnawed their tongues in anguish and cursed God of heaven for their pain and sores, and did not repent of their deeds. Revelation 6:18 through 11. Man, it's like some Black Sabbath lyrics. There is enough hatred, bigotry, and lust for violence in the pages of the Bible to satisfy anyone bent on justifying cruelty and violence. And that's the terrifying part right there. That is what worries me. And that is, one of many reasons why, although I went through my anti Christian phase, it's still troubling. It's still terrifying. Because you don't need much. You don't need, it's not like, populism, right wing populism. It's nothing like that, really. It's not even like racism. When faith is weaponized, there's nothing like it because it doesn't require much. We're all desperate in that regard. Not everybody's economically insecure. Not everybody's, you know, filled with hatred for other races or, insane pride for their own like that. But everybody's concerned about, what happens after we die. So everybody's vulnerable to religious like fanaticism. Religion, as Reinhold Niebuhr said, is a good thing for good people and a bad thing for bad people. That's some like Bob Dylan shit where it's like it's so simple, it sounds stupid, but then it's like, yeah, of course. And like I can't argue with the fact that you're correct. But the way you said it made it makes me sound stupid for not being able to break it down that simply. And the Bible has long been used in the wrong hands, such as antebellum slave owners in the American South who quoted from it to defend slavery, not to Christianize the culture as those wielding it often claim, but to acculturate the Christian faith. Acculturate the Christian faith. And y'all, please, if I mispronounce something, comment on, call me out on it. Se me traba la lengua sometimes. I forget what language I'm speaking. And like I said, the words might get a little jumbled. The letters might switch around for me. Never got tested. Who knows? But here we are. Daring to read publicly. Many of the suppositions of the biblical writers who understood little about the workings of the cosmos or the human body are so fanciful that the accounts so wild that even biblical literalists reject them. God is not, as many writers of the Bible believe, peering down at us through little peepholes in the sky called stars. These evangelicals and fundamentalists are, as the Reverend William Sloane Coffin wrote, not biblical literalists, as they claim, but selective literalists, choosing the bits and pieces of the Bible that conform to their ideology and ignoring, distorting, or inventing the rest. And the selective literalist cannot have it both ways. Either the Bible is literally true, and all of its edicts must be obeyed, or it must be read in another way. Mainstream Christians can also cherry pick the Bible to create a Jesus and God who are always loving and compassionate. And again, this is a credit to Chris Hedges. Yes, this is also annoying and, in my opinion, very fucking dangerous because you're hiding the reality of the scriptures, of the words, of what the Bible truly is. So somebody's going to believe all the lovey-dovey. They're going to believe the Disney-fied version of it all, although the Disney movie of Moses was actually pretty hardcore. You're going to believe in all that, and they're not going to question it. And when somebody says, like, hey, man, you're supporting something that is essentially bigoted, dangerous, violent, exclusionary, hateful, resentful, vengeful, all these words, they'll be like, what are you talking about? I've never heard of that before. So at the very least, just be honest and upfront in both regards. That's not too much to ask for. This is literally, bestowed upon us by a greater power. Such Christians often fail to acknowledge that there are hateful passages in the Bible that give sacred authority to the rage, self-aggrandizement, and intolerance of the Christian right. Church leaders must announce the biblical passages that champion apocalyptic violence and hateful political creeds. They must do so in the light of other biblical passages that teach a compassion and tolerance often exemplified in the life of Christ, which stands opposed to bigotry and violence. Until this happens, until the Christian churches wade into the debate, these biblical passages will be used by bigots and despots to give sacred authority to their cause to subjugate or eradicate enemies of God. This literature in the biblical canon keeps alive the virus of hatred, whether dormant or active, and possibility of an apocalyptic terror in the name of God, and a steady refusal by churches to challenge the canonical authority of these passages means these churches share some of the blame. I stumbled there, but literally this paragraph is a great example of like why this man, who I disagree with profusely, who's an anti-communist, is my favorite author. Because I may disagree with him, but goddamn, like yes, this is so smooth and eloquent and direct. I can't stand these, talking about self and aggrandizing academics that just want to flex that they flip through a dictionary Congratulations, man. Can you speak to the masses? This is great. And it's honest. It's honest. If these hateful, vengeful passages aren't addressed and denounced, they'll give rise to more hatred. Because it's easier to hate somebody than to love somebody. Because when you love somebody, it fucking hurts. It's painful when you love somebody. When you care for people, you're vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there to be hurt. So all those individuals that say don't trust others, be cautious, be paranoid of human nature, they'll get proven correct when a person makes a mistake or when they choose to be selfish in that moment in time and hurt you because you dared to love, you dared to care, you were courageous in the way that you live, right? In the way that you carry yourself. So it's scary, it's terrifying, it's difficult to love. It's so much easier to hate because damn, is it fun. Let's be honest about it. It is fun to hate. You don't need a lot of justifications to hate somebody. You don't need a lot of evidence. You could just say, hey, you know what? It's just a fucking feeling I have. I don't need to explain it. And you embrace hatred in all its disgusting deformities that it inflicts upon you. Because it doesn't just stop with one individual. It doesn't just stop with one group of people. It carries, it grows, it builds. It justifies itself without explanation, without rationale. That is hatred. That is hatred. It's efficient in the way that it spreads. A virus like no other is hatred. So that's why he's my favorite author. I mean, if y'all disagree, give me somebody else to read. But I do want to incorporate y'all into this as well. So please comment and let me know what you're all thinking. Better to let these stories be believed by the people where they came from, and that is not Europe and it's not America. uh, Listen, I get what you're saying because I do think that there is a certain character to religion. There is a certain um, utility to a religion. And that part I agree with you. Like, hey, like this doesn't even apply to you, bro. Like a lot of these like European Americans will try to like embrace like pagan like Viking Norse mythology, and it's like, bro, like you don't even know where the fuck you're from, homie, and you're over here like calling yourself Thor, which is a true fucking story. Some like neo-Nazi when I used to work at an unnamed coffee shop. I knew he was a fucking neo-Nazi, man. I just had that vibe, the way that he carried himself. He was a trucker. His name was Rick. And one day, he starts calling himself Thor. Because he had to take his name. And he starts calling himself Thor. And I'm just like, bro, we're going down this rabbit hole. And one of my favorite things to do is politely make people uncomfortable that are like racist, right? And you're saying, well, you didn't know. I'm like, homie, I fucking knew. You don't go from Rick to Thor. You know, you just don't do that. And sure enough, one day, if he decides to sit down in the cafe area and he's wearing shorts and, you know, the black sun, it's boom right there in his kneecap. Because white supremacists, neo Nazis, whatever, the elbows and the kneecaps, they love that shit. I don't get it. I can make jokes, but we'll move on. All right. Quote, unless the churches, Protestant and Catholic alike, come together on this, they will continue to make it legitimate to believe in the end as a time when there will be no non Christian or infidels, theologian Richard Fenn wrote. Silent complicity with apocalyptic rhetoric soon becomes collusion with plans for religiously inspired genocide. And this is why I love to read. Because, of course, it does. But would I have ever worded it this way? Absolutely not. But now, if I'm having a conversation with somebody who is flirting with this or excusing it, or and I'm speaking about people, in good faith who have just been misled or swallowing up a lot of media propaganda, especially again now when we're hearing these excuses from mainstream media nonstop and even so-called alternative media who are unwilling to call for total decolonization and embrace the armed resistance of Palestinians. You see them flirt with this silent complicity of a genocide, the Zionist entity against the Palestinian people. So this silent complicity with apocalyptic rhetoric soon becomes collusion with plans for religiously inspired genocide. And again, we understand here that the Zionist entity's genocide against Palestinians is not rooted in religion, that religion is weaponized. But those fanatics, the true believers, not the opportunists, but the true believers, this applies to them. They're not thinking about, oh, I need this land for resources. They're thinking about, this land is mine because God said so. That's a distinction. That's why it's important to read this, because this focuses on the opportunists who lead the true believers, the Benjamin Netanyahu, right? The Theodore Herzl, however you pronounce his fucking name. Those are opportunists. We understand that the original founders of the Zionist entity were predominantly atheists, but they weaponized Judaism, and now we have a horde of true believers. And again, Sam Seder tried to fudge the numbers, but unfortunately, the vast majority of Jewish Americans, around 80%, whether, to some importance or very important, have a relationship to the Zionist entity as part of the Jewish identity. And that's dangerous. That's part. You've seen these people who, in every other case, would vote, Democrat because they were liberal. But really what they're saying is like, hey, like, I'm socially liberal. They're not homophobic, even if their, religious texts might support, homophobia. But when it comes to their faith, right? Because again, they're not viewing it in the settler colonial sense. They truly view it as, no, this is our land because God promised it to us. They become complicit, and they go from being silent all these years that nobody talked about the Zionist entity, silent complicity, or talked about it, but in a very soft hand, the way that liberal Zionists do. Now we see them out and about, and they're like animated in their religious inspired genocide, according to them, the true believers. Let's not mix that up. All right, let's carry on here. As long as scripture, blessed and accepted by the church, teaches that at the end of time there will be a day of wrath, and Christians will control the shattered remnants of the world cleansed through violence and war. As long as it teaches that all non believers will be tormented, destroyed, and banished to hell, it will be hard to thwart the message of radical apocalyptic preachers or assuage the fears of the Islamic world that Christians are calling for its annihilation. Those who embrace this dark conclusion to life can find it endorsed in Scripture, whether it is tucked into the back pew rack of a liberal Unitarian church or in Boston or a megachurch. Excuse me, in a liberal Unitarian church in Boston or a megachurch in Florida. The mainstream Protestant and Catholic churches, declining in numbers and influence, cannot hope to combat the hysteria and excitement roused by these prophets of doom until they repudiate the apocalyptic writings in Scripture. The writers of Genesis, as the Reverend William Sloane Coffin has pointed out, who wrote about the creation of the world in 7 days, knew nothing about the process of creation. They believed the earth was flat, with water above and below it. They wrote that God created light on the first day and the sun on the fourth day. Genesis was not written to explain the process of creation, of which these writers knew nothing. It was written to help explain the purpose of creation. It was written to help us grasp a spiritual truth, not a scientific or historical fact. And this purpose, this spiritual truth, is something the writers did know about. These biblical writers, at their best, understood our divided natures. They knew our internal conflict and battles, how we could love our brothers and yet hate him. The oppressive power of parents, even in the best of parents, the impulses that drive us to commit violations against others, the yearning to lead a life of meaning, our fear of mortality, our struggles to deal with our uncertainty, our loneliness, our greed, our lust, our ambition, our desires to be God, as well as our moments of nobility, compassion, and courage. They knew these emotions and feelings were entangled. They understood our weaknesses and strengths. They understood how we are often not the people we want to be or know we should be. How hard it is for us to articulate all this, and how life and creation can be as glorious and beautiful as it can be mysterious, evil, and cruel. This is why Genesis is worth reading. Indeed, why the Bible stands as one of the great ethical and moral documents of our age. The biblical writers have helped shape and define Western civilization. Not to know the Bible is, in some ways, to be illiterate, to neglect the very roots of philosophy, art, literature, poetry, and music. It is to fall into a dangerous provisionalism, as myopic and narrow as that embraced by those who say everything in the Bible is literally true, and we do not need any other kind of intellectual or scientific inquiry. Doubt and belief are not, as biblical literalists claim, incompatible. Those who act without any doubt are frightening. Absolutely. Those that act without any doubt are frightening. Yes. Yes. Yes, they are. I am consistently doubting myself. And if you're not, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. Where are we? All right. Not too much doubt, though, right? Not too much doubt. Believe in yourself. Have faith in yourself. But damn, you never want to ask, am I the asshole? You should know when you're the asshole. You ever go to that subreddit? Am I the asshole? And then they explain it's like, girl, come on. Like, you lack any self awareness, any self criticism. Do you not doubt any of the fucking moves you make? And you might say, well, clearly, clearly they have some doubt in themselves if they're asking if they're the asshole. Let's be honest, most of the people that post, most of the people that come and ask you, hey, do you know, did I do something wrong? Or what do you think about this? They already know. So it's a facade. They're just hoping that you dismiss their doubt. So they can walk away and be like, yeah, you're right. I was right to do that. It was them. It's the world. It's not me. But that being said, I do disagree with Chris Hedges here. I don't think it's the Bible is like required reading material. And even where he states, um, the biblical writers have helped shape and define Western civilization. Uh, was it just people reading the Bible that helped, spread the word and help form Western civilization? This is why I disagree with what do you call that? Like the subtitle, the secondary title, the Christian right and the war in America. It's not a war in America. The same way that it can't be a war against Western civilization. It is part of Western civilization. You know, Christian fascism is part of the Western civilization. It's how it came to be. It's how it's Christianity spread. Let's continue. Their lives, more faith, and honest doubt, the poet Alfred Tennyson noted. Believe me that in half the creeds, see, that's confusing me. Okay, there lives more faith in honest doubt, believe me, than in half the creeds. That one's going over my head, y'all. Sounds intelligent, sounds smart, but it's going over my head. If anybody of you out there know what that means, put it in the chat or in the comments, please. Again, it's not the first time I'm reading this, but it doesn't mean I understood all of it. This was my faith. It was a pretty good summary of my faith today. Sorry, this was my faith. It is a pretty good summary of my faith today. God is inscrutable, mysterious, and unknowable. We do not understand what life is about, what it means, why we are here, and what will happen to us after our brief sojourn on the planet ends. We are saved in the end by faith. Faith that life is not meaningless and random, that there is a purpose to human existence, that in the midst of this morally neutral universe, the tiny, seemingly insignificant acts of compassion and blind human kindness, especially to those labeled our enemies and strangers, sustain the divine spark which is love. We are not fully human. We are not fully human if we live alone. These small acts of compassion, for they can never be organized and institutionalized as can hate, have a power that lives after us. Human kindness is deeply subversive to totalitarian creeds which seek to thwart all compassion toward those deemed unworthy of moral consideration, those branded as internal or external enemies. These acts recognize and affirm the humanity of others, others who may be condemned as agents of Satan. Those who sacrifice for others, especially at great cost, who place compassion and tolerance above ideology and creeds, and who reject absolutes, especially moral absolutes, stand as constant witnesses in our lives to this love, even long after they are gone. In the Gospels, this is called resurrection. And as a non believer, as an atheist, that is beautiful, isn't it? I mean, the whole paragraph, without a doubt, is beautiful. But that end, that last part, those who sacrifice for others, especially at great cost, who place compassion and tolerance above ideology and creeds, who reject absolutes, especially moral absolutes, stand as constant witnesses in our lives to this love long after they are gone. Long after they are gone, their love continues to influence us. It continues to grow and spread. And he claims that this, according to the gospel, is true resurrection. And again, contrasting the literal approach of the Bible. But in that regard, like it makes, my heart ache a little bit. Like, how beautiful is that, man? Again, I disagree with you. And once that initial reaction of emotions passes me, subsides, I'm like, yeah, I disagree with Christianity. But in this moment, I'm like, God damn, Chris Hedges. God damn, bro. The world is lucky that you didn't devote yourself solely to the priesthood. Because you would have converted a lot of motherfuckers out there. Because even this, man, like this oldest bastard right here is, it gets a little shaken up, gets a little nervous, gets a little, like maybe that is resurrection, man. Faith presupposes that we cannot know. We can never know. Those who claim to know what life means play God. These false prophets, the Pat Robertsons, the Jerry Falwells, the James Dobsons, clutching the cross and the Bible, offer, like Mistiphilis, I think so, yeah, to lead us back to a mythical paradise. Mephistophiles? I'm assuming it's Mephisto, right? Mephisto. Oh, ugh, excuse me. Mephistopheles. There you go. Mephistopheles. I know some words. All right. Clutching the cross and the Bible offer, like Mephistopheles, to lead us back to a mythical paradise and an impossible, unachievable happiness and security at once. Seductive and empowering. They ask us to hand over moral choice and responsibility to them. They will tell us they know what is right and wrong in the eyes of God. They tell us how to act, how to live, and in this process, they elevate themselves above us. They remove the anxiety of moral choice, the fundamental anxiety of human existence. This is part of their attraction. They give us the rules by which we live. But once we hand over this anxiety and accept their authority, we become enslaved and they become our idols. And idols, as the Bible never ceases to tell us, destroys us. And I try to avoid getting too personal on here because I think that there's a lot of opportunists, a lot of leftists, online leftists, I should say, who share, their personal life, their journeys, put their family on blast and what have you, to increase the parasocial relationship. But I will admit to this part. There's an individual who I know who is a Christian, and they're, man, even if you don't know them, they will light up a room. Like as soon as they walk into a door, into a new room, through the door. Actually, they might walk into the door because they're a little clumsy. But as soon as they walk through a door, like the room just lights up. And again, it's one of these Christians where you're like, man, I wish and I hope that all Christians were like you because the world would be so beautiful and your faith would truly be tempting for me to invest in completely. And I was speaking to them once and I was about to explain why, I don't have faith in God or why I lack faith and why I'm a non-believer. And I was going to try to, articulate myself in the most grandiose kind of like flexing, like, listen, like I'm smart for not believing in God, like, that type of arrogant approach. And before I could get a word out, she says, because you won't submit. Because you won't submit. And that hit me like a ton of bricks because I'm like, is that what it is? Is that what I'm lacking? Submission to something greater than myself. Well, to be specific, something, magically something beyond reality as we know it, more than myself. I'm not willing to give myself to something that requires faith. And I thought about that for days and whatever. And I'm like, she's absolutely right. How were they able to articulate and just conceptualize and pinpoint what was stopping me from believing? But this is the dangers of submitting. Because if you submit to the word, sure, but are you submitting to the word of God, or are you submitting to the interpreter, to your priest, to your pastor, or rabbi, your whoever? Are you submitting to their interpretation of it? All right. Especially when you're at a young age, like, come on. Are you capable of analyzing and dissecting these texts? Are you aware of the history as Chris Hedges clearly is over here? Are you comfortable with the contradictions? How do you grapple with those contradictions? Or you just go by whatever your pastor, your rabbi, whoever, fucking Grand Mufti over here is telling you? Let me all right, let's carry on. I have seen enough of the world over the past 2 decades. For although I graduated from seminary, I was not ordained and instead worked in Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and the Balkans as a foreign correspondent. To grasp that men and women of great moral pro- probity and courage arise in all cultures, all nations, and all religions to challenge the oppressor and fight for the oppressed. I also saw how the dominant religions of these nations were often twisted and distorted by totalitarian movements, turned into civic religions in which the goals of the movement or the state become the goals of the divine. The wars they covered were often fought in the name of one god or another. Armed groups from Hamas in the West Bank and Gaza Strip to the Serbian nationalists in the former Yugoslavia were fueled by apocalyptic visions that sanctified terrorism or genocide. They mocked the faith they purported to defend. Again, I recognize the shortcomings of Chris Hedges, and shortcomings is me putting it politely. And yet he's still my favorite author because of the way that he writes. Now, if he was like one of these creep directors, it'd be a whole different story. Here, we just have a total disagreement. And the way that he compares certain groups and individuals to the most atrocious individuals, it's like when liberals, centrists, will claim that, Nazis and communists are just, the same thing, just on two extreme ends, but that they're equally bad. And it's like, really, communists saying, you know, off with the boss's heads are the same thing as Nazis claiming to be the superior human race? Like, it's not even honest. It's not even, it's not honest. So for him to, be here saying like Hamas, an organization fighting for the liberation of Palestine, is the same thing as the Serbian nationalists. It's like, that's atrocious. That's atrocious, and it makes me wonder, like, oh, well, maybe he's speaking about a different Hamas, or like a different incarnation of it when they were still doing like suicide bombings. Fuck out of here. I don't want to hear none of that. I don't want to hear none of that because We know how much damage those martyrs inflicted upon the Zionist entity. And their sacrifice will not be in vain. The liberation of Palestine will be in part, as with every Palestinian that resists, be thanks to them. And there's different forms of resistance, of course. Okay. America and the Christian religions have no monopoly on goodness or saintliness. God has not chosen Americans as people above others. The beliefs of Christians are as flawed and imperfect as all religious beliefs, but both the best of American democracy and the best of Christianity embody important values. Those such as compassion, tolerance, and belief in justice and equality. America is a nation where all have a voice in how we live and how we are governed. We have never fully adhered to these values, indeed, probably never will, but our health as a country is determined by our steadfastness in striving to attain them. And there are times when taking a moral stance, perhaps the highest form of patriotism, means facing down the community, even the nation. Our loyalty to our community and our nation, Reinhold Nebar wrote, is therefore morally tolerable only if it includes the values wider than those of the community. Now, Chris Hedges suffers from settler realism, where he legitimizes the existence and the possibility of the American entity, the settler colonial project itself, somehow being able to not only redeem itself, but pursue righteous endeavors. It can never happen. I mean, you'll never have justice on stolen land, right? Not the Zionists and not the. I need to find a shorthand or a. And help me out here. Like, for somebody who believes in manifest destiny, without actually saying manifest destiny. For somebody who believes in man's destiny, right? Because fundamentally, if you believe in the American entity, then you believe and support manifest destiny. But that's for another conversation. Or rather, I should say, that's something that I'm still struggling to articulate and understand and elaborate and explain properly. These values, democratic and Christian, are being dismantled, often with stealth, by a radical Christian movement known as Dominionism, which seeks to cloak itself in the mantle of the Christian faith and American patriotism. Dominionism takes its name from Genesis 1:26 to 31, in which God gives human beings dominion over all creation. This movement, small in number but influential, departs from traditional evangelicalism. Dominionists, Dominionists now control at least six national television networks, each reaching tens of millions of homes, and virtually all of the nation's more than 2,000 religious radio stations, as well as denominations such as the Southern Baptist Convention. Dominionism seeks to redefine traditional democratic and Christian terms and concepts to fit an ideology that calls on the radical church to take political power. It shares many prominent features with classical fascist movements, at least as it is defined by the scholar Robert O. Paxton, who sees fascism as a form. Let me read this out here. Sorry, y'all, my eyes are struggling with this lighting here. I thought it looked cool, but I like red. It's that simple. Okay. Oh, and I apologize for chewing ice. I don't know if y'all picked that up. Okay, quote. A form of political behavior marked by obsessive preoccupation with community decline, humiliation, or victimhood, and by compensatory cultures of unity, energy, and purity, in which a mass based party of committed nationalist militants working in uneasy but effective collaboration with traditional elites abandons democratic liberties and pursues with redemptive violence and without ethical or legal restraints goals of internal cleansing and external expansion. That's a mouthful. That was quite a bit, right? So, again, it shares many prominent features with classical fascist movements, at least as it is defined by the scholar Robert O. Paxton, who sees fascism as a form of political behavior marked by obsessive preoccupation with community decline, humiliation. And now that part stood out to me, humiliation. These white nationalists all feel like the white man is being humiliated because he's no longer the center of attention. Suddenly, making fun of white men is applauded, and they don't know how to handle it. They never develop, despite their claims otherwise. They never develop thick skin. They always say, just take a joke. But a lot of these reactionaries become reactionaries because of their fear of being humiliated or victimhood. Again, they're always the victims. It's only been a couple of years. It's only been a couple of years that they're made fun of, that they're the butt of the joke, but they're forever the victims. Further than that, or pushing that even back more, broadening it, I should say, is the greatest victim complex, the victimhood complex, being the great replacement, the white genocide that is occurring by hordes of invading brown and black people by mixed racing. Imagine, imagine colonizing the world and complaining about the people you colonized moving into your backyard. The victimhood complex is unmatched. But we do see the allegiance, and again, uneasy but effective allegiance of all these, you know, religious based, militant based, and the elites funding them, all to push this agenda, this white nationalist Christian agenda. Dominianism, born out of the theology known as Christian Reconstructionism, seeks to politicize faith. It has, like all fascist movements, a belief in magic along with leadership adoration and a strident call for moral and physical supremacy of a master race. In this case, American Christians. It also has, like fascist movements, an ill defined and shifting set of beliefs, most of which contradict one another. Paxton argues that the best way to understand authentic fascist movements, which he says exist in all societies, including democracies, is to focus not on what they say, but on how they act. Whereas he writes, some of the ideas that underlie fascist movements remain unstated and implicit in fascist public language. And many of them belong more to the realm of visceral feelings than to the realm of reasoned positions. Again, it's easy to hate because you don't need to explain it because it's not rational. Fascism is a kind of colonization. The Reverend Davidson Lore noted a simple definition of colonization is that it takes people's stories away and assigns them supportive roles in stories that empower others at their expense. Ah, I hate how poetic that sounds because while it is generally poetically accurate in its description of what colonization is, it's almost too fanciful. It's almost too fancy. It's like it gets rid of the tragedy, the horror, and the bloodshed of colonization by simply saying we're taking away your stories and now you're in a supporting role. I mean, yes, absolutely, yes, but it's like it sounds like this is a goddamn fucking musical. All right, the dominionist movement, like all totalitarian movements, seeks to appropriate not only our religious and patriotic language, but also our stories, to deny the validity of stories other than their own, to deny that there are other acceptable ways of living and being. There becomes, in their rhetoric, only one way to be a Christian and only one way to be an American. And literally just slightly diverging from that means that you're un-American, means that you're, you know, satanic. And if you go too far, then clearly you are a groomer pedophile trying to trans the children. But the steps from one to the next is linear, right? They're connected and they're not that far apart. But at the end, they have the same sentiment. You are the enemy. It's just how much of a boogeyman do they make you? Dominionism is a theocratic set with its roots in a radical Calvinism. It looks to the theocracy John Calvin implemented in Geneva, Switzerland in the 1500s as its political model. It teaches that American Christians have been mandated by God to make America a Christian state. A decades long refusal by most American fundamentalists to engage in politics at all following the 1925 Scopes trial has been replaced by a call for Christians' dominion over the nation and eventually over the earth itself. Dominionism preaches that Jesus has called on Christians to build the kingdom of God in the here and now, whereas previously it was thought that we would have to wait for it. America becomes, in this militant biblicism, an agent of God, and all political and intellectual opponents of America's Christian leaders are viewed quite simply as agents of Satan. Under Christian dominion, America will no longer will be sorry, excuse me. Under Christian dominion, America will be no longer a sinful and fallen nation, but one in which the 10 commandments from the basis of our legal system, creationism, and Christian values from the basis of our educational system and the media and the government proclaim the good news to one and all. Labor unions, civil rights laws, and public schools will be abolished. Women will be removed from the workforce to stay at home, and all those deemed insufficiently Christian will be denied citizenship. Aside from its proselytizing mandate, the federal government will be reduced to the protection of property rights the homeland and homeland security. Some dominionists, not all, of whom accept the label, at least not publicly, would further require all citizens to pay tithes, teeth to church organizations empowered by the government to run our social welfare agencies and schools. The only legitimate voices in this state will be Christians, and all others will be silenced. I want to take a moment just to highlight the fact that the federal government will be reduced to the protection of property rights and homeland security. This makes me want to should we do Mumia next? Mumia Abdul Jamal. Should we do him next? Because he has a great section on the nonsensical verbiage or language of homeland security. That brought to mind. Okay, man, that's a shorter book too. But no, this is, I mean, the blueprint that's laid out of what, of literally converting this already, I mean, for all intents and purposes, Christian nation into a fascist Christian nation. And yeah, and that's the issue. That's the main concern, is that anybody against it is automatically Satan, the devil. And we see this in conspiracy theories that the right has, where immediately, oh, uh, they're trafficking children, they're taking their what is that liquid that they claim that Hillary Clinton and the Democrats are drinking to, like, to Vidochrome or something like that. It's something weird to where, like, oh yeah, they're drinking that to stay youthful and young, and they take it from children and shit like that. Immediately, it runs into the satanic, into the magical, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not comfortable in, like, just faith in general. Where it's like, if you believe a religious text, you believe that Jesus walked on water, you believe that in any miracle, then you're essentially opening the floodgates to believe in any and all mythical stories. Why aren't there unicorns? Why weren't there giants? I mean, giants, the Bible has them too, right? But why weren't they? Why aren't there? I'm trying to think of like a non-Western creature, but like, why? Why does it have to stop there? Why not elves? Why not orcs? Why not? Now I'm thinking Lord of the Rings, but why not all these mythical creatures? Why can't they not exist in one shape or form or another? If you're already saying, yes, I believe in the magical, in the fanciful, like in the fantasy of it all. That's what I'm concerned about. That's why I worry about people who generally have faith. Because I'm like, well, if you believe in that, what's stopping you from believing in fucking this shit? Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing, decolonized buffalo. Little people exist in folklore all over the world. I mean, yeah, but like, what the fuck does little mean? Like, how small are we talking about here? Honey, I Shrunk the Kid small? Or, I mean, giants are also like pretty popular globally, but like, we've been growing for fucking generations. If you look at some of the old houses, if there's any old houses like in your community, the doorway is like fucking down here, So, but yeah. All right, we're at 35. You know what? I'm gonna end it here, y'all, just because. It's late, and I think we're barely halfway through the chapter. So what I'm gonna do? Oh yeah, it's quite a bit left. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna relabel this and maybe change up the thumbnail to chapter one, part one. But I'll try keeping it to just a part two. I did like run my mouth a lot at the beginning of this, um, but I really enjoy this. Let me know if y'all enjoy this. Honestly, I don't even know if that's a slur, sir. but but we're gonna start doing these every Monday. Um, Hopefully, I'll be able to speed up. And again, if going through like word for word is too much, maybe just prominent sections of every chapter might be the better solution to kind of get through more of these books. Because I also want to tackle books that I haven't read. I low key feel like this is cheating, although I haven't read this book in quite some time. Like doing the notes and the highlighting the PDF from my actual paperback copy here, I was able to start like kind of summarizing a lot of this and remembering a lot of it. Remembering why Chris Hedges is, despite my many disagreements with him, my favorite writer. Um, but yeah, I think every Monday we'll do this just because, to be honest, like this was my initial my initial goal for this channel was to just, I mean, I thought it was gonna be like, what is it? What do they call it? Like booktube, or where it's just like I was just gonna talk about books and the shit that I like to read or things that I want to read, take suggestions. That was the initial thing, and then I just again I started seeing all these opportunists who are just trying to profit off the oppression and the literal genocide of other people. What's this comedian from Bad Haspera? He's pretty famous now. Let's see, Bad Haspera podcast. Oh, Matt Lieb. That's his name? Is it Matt Lieb? Wow. This guy. He doesn't look like this anymore, but let me just share this real quick. Let's see. This is all his good photos. I want to see his modern fucking photos. This is a good one. This guy here, and this is his wife, who had like a show on MSNBC for a while. Big TYT contributor. She's on Piers Morgan sometimes as well. What's her name? It's fucking yeah, I can't remember. But this guy, Matt Lieb, has been like just getting rich off of Palestinian suffering. The literal genocide of Palestinians is how his career blew up. Oh, her name's Francesca something something Italian, but her name's Francesca. But Matt Lieb, to me, is one of the most vile, disgusting fucking human beings right now, because he's literally profiting off of Palestinian genocide, and he does a podcast, Bad Haspera, and Haspera is like the Zionist propaganda. So he's like, oh, we're doing bad Zionist propaganda by combating Zionist propaganda, but promoting liberal Zionism. You never hear him applauding resistance forces. You never hear him, calling for decolonization. It's all liberal Zionist bullshit. And he's making, let's see what his channel has. Um, how many subscribers does this guy have? I was watching some stupid shit. Are you kidding me, bro? Look at this. 18,000 subscribers. And he does fairly well. 19,000 4 days ago, 25,000 when he had Aaron Mate, who's another proponent of liberal Zionism. And he has names like Omar Badar, who again is too cozy with liberal Zionists, so it makes you question exactly his position. But in comparison to somebody like Destiny, who's parroting Zionist talking points, you're like, oh yeah, this guy's not is on the right track. He literally had Mark Lamont Hill, who was fired from his previous job for saying uh, "from the river to the sea," and this was years ago. Why is Mark Lamont Hill cozying up to liberal Zionist Matt Lieb? It's just disgusting that these individuals are able to profit off the genocide of Palestinians. He shouldn't be making a penny off of this. He shouldn't be making up, and literally everything he's making off of this should be going to Palestinians, but it isn't. And he's touring and he's making money off of the genocide of Palestinians, and he's promoting liberal Zionism. It's not even like you could say, oh, well, he's calling for decolonization. He's calling for the total liberation and decolonization of Palestine. Not even that. So because of bastards like that, I can't just focus and read fucking books and have a good time. But we'll do that on Mondays. And of course, there'll be books calling out white supremacy. I think there's a lot of great channels and podcasts out there that focus on literature and books that are like um that focus on black radicals, on indigenous uh, peoples. I kind of want to focus a little bit on um exposing whiteness, white nationalists, Christian nationalism. Like I want to focus a little bit on that. Not enough people are talking about the Klan, the KKK. Like, why are we calling everybody like, oh, like the American Taliban is one, right? That we hear a lot about. They're like, oh, Nazi is the biggest fucking insult. Well, I mean, a Klansman predates Nazis. A Klansman predates a Nazi. So it's like a slave master should be like the worst fucking thing you can get called. A colonizer should be the worst thing you could be called. But instead of all the Nazis, because the US was a good guy against them, supposedly, right? My point being, on Wednesdays, I'll talk my shit, I'll run my mouth. On Mondays, we'll do this, chapter review stuff. And, on second thought, I think we're going to cut the chapter short and just talk about the main sections. Because I also don't know what copyright infringements I may be violating. And time management, always time management is something that I lack. I have to be up at 4 a.m. So buenas noches. Thank y'all for being here. Again, Chris Hedges, American Fascists, the Christian Right, and the War on America, even though we disagree with that title. I appreciate y'all. I have the book. Check out your local bookstores. Get it used. There may or may not be websites out there that I may or may not condone and participate in. I'm grateful for. With that being said, gracias. Buenas noches. Hasta la próxima. Ya estuvo. Thank you. Like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what y'all think about this. I appreciate it.